Hi everyone, my name is Inge Kusuma, Country Head of Tanoto Foundations Indonesia. I'm pleased to welcome you back to the new episodes of Tanoto Foundation's Unlocking Potential. Today we have a very exciting topic to discuss, the critical role of early childhood education and development in shaping the future of Indonesia. We have a very special guest today from UNICEF. In the past few years, it has been a true privilege for Tanoto Foundations to partner with UNICEF on several programs on early childhood education and development. I'm very honored to be joined by Maniza Zaman, UNICEF Indonesia Country Representative. Welcome, Maniza. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Inge. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Let's start our discussion today by talking about the bold aspirations of the country. Indonesia must, in 2045, or a golden Indonesia, to mark our 100th year of anniversary of our independence. By then, Indonesia will have a demographic bonus. What it means is the productive populations will surpass those non-productive age group. And we all know the preparation has to start today, 20 years down the line. And the children should be our priority, especially in early years. So the questions to you, Maniza, can you share more why early years is very, very crucial in the development of a child?
Thank you so much. What a wonderful question. And of course, future congratulations to the country aspiring for the 100 years. So the first years of life are absolutely critical in shaping the future of a child and hence a society and a generation. It actually shapes what's going to happen to that human being later on in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of also employment and productive capacity. And so the question would be, why is that? And I'd like to share a few facts with you, Inge. So let's look at the very early years. When a baby is born, the size of a baby's brain is 1/4 the size of an adult's brain. Fact number one. By the age of 1, the size has doubled. Secondly, 90% of brain development already happens by the age of 5.
Oh, 5.
Mm-hmm. Third, 60% of the baby's energy intake goes to developing the brain. And finally, a baby's brain is capable of making 1 million new connections every second.
That's amazing.
Pace that is never repeated in our lives. So you can now see how critical those very early years are for not just brain development, but also a child's growth and overall development of the body. So it's a window of opportunity. And you've often probably heard the term the first 1,000 days as a golden window of opportunity, if I can say that. And that really starts from conception to the age of 2 years old. I think, and the science tells us, it's a make or break time. With the right investments at that time, we can really have the full potential of every single individual, every single child. So that's why I think it's absolutely critical to invest in early childhood. And just imagine what Indonesia could reap if that investment started already and for the future.
Thank you, Maniza. We came across your newly published the annual report of UNICEF, and there was a very catchy tagline. Let me read that for the viewers here. It says, "Towards a golden Indonesia that puts children first." To us, that really highlights the importance to prioritize the children to achieve Indonesia must in 2045. So you mentioned just now the importance also to invest in early years. This should allow every child to have the best possible start in life. So the next question is, can you provide more insights? Why the investment in early childhood is very valuable, especially for the country like Indonesia?
So I think, as you mentioned, the population of Indonesia is only going to grow, and by about 2045, I think the figures say that it'll be something like 380 million odd. Of that, as you also mentioned, the productive age is going to be about 60% of that is going to be productive age, right? Workforce. And in your opening, you also mentioned we're looking 20 years ahead. So basically, that means we need to really prepare now. Yes, the future workforce they're basically at home now, or they're to be born, right, or they're already in early education if they're lucky. So this really is the time. So I think timing is going to be essential if indeed Indonesia is going to reap what is called the demographic bonus. To get the bonus, it just doesn't happen. One has to invest to get the bonus. Yeah. So I think that's why it's critical. Earlier, I spoke primarily about the 1,000 days, which is from basically conception to 2 years. But if we take that journey from there, typically a child would, if again they're fortunate enough, go to some kind of early learning institution or center, between 3 to 5. And then around 5 to 6, they would go to school. I would like to highlight at this point the importance of early childhood education, which is one dimension of early childhood development. We've also seen through research that it is absolutely critical that children get that 1 year, at least, of early learning and early education before they go to school, because that really sets the foundation for numeracy, literacy, and character building. This can all sound technical, but frankly, if you think about yourself, or we think about our children, I think about my children, and I think about the tremendous benefits they had when they were able to spend those couple of years in kindergarten before they were ready for the big school. And science also tells us that those children who have the opportunity of early childhood education actually do better in school. They're more confident, their learning outcomes are better, and of course then they become, I guess, more productive citizens. When you're deprived of this, those children fall behind. That can lead to poor learning outcomes. That can lead to dropouts as well. When you look at return on investment, because sometimes people would like the economic argument, our study here in Indonesia found that for every 1 rupiah that you invest in early childhood education, you get 4 times the return. So it is an absolutely winning bet, if I can say that.
It is.
Allow me just also to mention that, yes, there has been progress in access to early childhood education in Indonesia. However, only 35% of children between the ages of 3 and 6 have access to early childhood centers. Maybe what I can say on the positive part is Indonesia has a model which is an integrated early childhood center, which means, yes, there's early learning, but there are also nutrition and health services that are provided there. So it's using that opportunity as well to continue the health and nutrition support for these children. I think it is time to really make a big push on the full platform of early childhood development and within that early childhood education. The current budget allocation for early childhood education in Indonesia is 0.8% of the national education budget. That is significantly below the 10% benchmark internationally. So at UNICEF and together with yourselves and other partners, we're really advocating for a lot more investment in early childhood development and education.
Wow, that's actually amazing. There are a lot of numbers that we still need to work on. But I think there are two things I wanted to take from what you said. The first is the importance of the first 1,000 days, which is the window of the opportunity. As it's not only the first 1,000 days, this period will shape the lifelong health and the well-being of every child. And you also mentioned the importance of early childhood educations. So the question is, can you recommend the most effective and sustainable strategy to develop this ecosystem in early childhood educations?
Okay, I think that's a really fascinating question, not a simple one. And why do I say that? Because I think if we look at what we mean by early childhood development and the years of a child's life that we're covering, we're really starting from basically pregnancy all the way till about 5, 6, 7 years of age, right? So it's a whole chunk of time, so to speak. And in our conversation, implicitly, what we've discussed is the whole area of maternal health and well-being. We've implicitly discussed child health and nutrition. And then we've also discussed early childhood education. I'm keeping it quite simple. So it means that there needs to be a continuum of care and support and services for the mother and the child. And to do that, it means that different sectors need to connect, different stakeholders need to come together. They need to have a very common vision of what it is they're trying to achieve, and they have to work seamlessly, with one another. If I take basically a child, right, let's say from conception to birth, it is true that it's primarily at the family level and the health service level that you have the first set of major interventions, right? When I say health service, I also include nutrition in there. But then by the age of, let's say, 3 to 5, these are important, but then the education system starts to come in. So the education becomes a platform. So for all this to work well together, I think coordination and having really effective coordination at multiple levels, down to the village level, is extremely important. And as we know, coordination is not the simplest task in the world. But it's not coordination for the sake of coordination. It's coordination so that we're very clear about what the goals are. We track progress. We make sure that the bottlenecks in services are addressed. And we really kind of, really come together and use our resources optimally for the optimal kind of outcomes. I think the other part that needs to be part of let me say, ecosystem or component of all this is parenting. Parenting. So it's like, what is parenting? It's a good question, actually. But basically, parents and caregiver and the caregivers at the home are of the frontline support of children. And sometimes we assume that we all know what's best for children. And what's true is every child or every parent or caregiver really wants what's best for their children. But where we have a missing link is sometimes the science that tells us certain things and translating that into simple language and knowledge that all parents can have and then actually use. So I think parenting programs also should sort of underlie this ecosystem, so to speak, that can really propel early childhood development and education. So definitely coordination, system support, systems connectivity, systems that talk to each other. And I would say what I would call parenting, but more, it's also about public awareness, social and behavior change, communication, that component as well. Finally, underlined by financing, a reasonable amount of financing for us to get to where we need to get to. Yeah.
So it's a very complex issue, right? So I'm very interested, about the parenting practice and the need for the parents to understand the value of early learning educations. But before that, I was also interested with what you said, the need of having 1 year of pre-primary that will probably change a child's life, right? As we all know, the government of Indonesia today, they are aiming to have a 13-year mandatory for all the children in Indonesia. So if this happens and becomes a law in Indonesia, Indonesia will be perhaps one of the first few countries in Southeast Asia to mandate 1 year pre-primary as basic education. So what do you think of this?
I think for all the reasons that we've just discussed, Inge, I think this would be an excellent breakthrough. And it's something that I think as UNICEF Indonesia, we also have been working and advocating for a while. We're really glad to see that there has been progress and perhaps is at the cusp of the next piece on that. This will benefit not only children who are in the education system now, but of course the future generations to come. So I think it would be an extremely positive development. It would also follow suit, I think, follow suit in terms of some of the other countries in the region that have already started investing significantly in early childhood education as part of their national development plan. They kind of see this as a foundation. And I think Indonesia, because of its very strong regional and increasingly global leadership role, if Indonesia were to go in this direction, it would be a breakthrough not just for the children of this country, but I think it would influence other countries in the region as well. So I can see a multiplier effect potentially. So we're counting the days.
Exactly. Fingers crossed. So hopefully this will become a law soon. And you mentioned a figure before that the enrollment rate for early childhood is very low in Indonesia. Only 1 of every 3 child getting access to early childhood education. So hopefully when this becomes a law, the enrollment rate of early childhood will be as high as it is in primary school, which is close to 100%. So it's not only about the access to school. I'm sure you agree, it's also about the quality of education. So the next questions to you, Maniza, what do you think are the main challenges to improve the access and the quality to early childhood education and development in Indonesia?
You're absolutely right. It's just not a matter of numbers. It's about what happens in those centers and in those institutions, Perhaps I could point out a few things that I think we would, need to overcome. First, I think we need a uniform understanding and appreciation from parents and caregivers about the critical importance of this additional 1 year of pre-primary. I'm not sure that it's uniformly understood. So we do need to do quite a bit, perhaps, of, let's say, education and sensitization in terms of why this is so important. What are the returns later on? So that's probably number one, just getting that uniform understanding about this. I think that the second, yes, it's access, and eventually, if this becomes law, one would have to really, frankly, think about physical infrastructure and the number of ECD centers, etc., that kindergartens that we would need to be able to move on this, right? And particularly in some of the more difficult terrains in this country, which is a vast and diverse country, how is that exactly going to happen? The third, I think, will be in relation to qualified teachers. Sometimes there's an assumption that for the early grades, maybe you don't need so much qualification and,
It's not true.
Exactly. And currently, in fact, the data that we have shows that only 60% of the current teachers of early childhood education have a university degree compared to over 90% in all the other classes. Yeah. So I think there needs to be a recognition that this is a very noble profession, even at the very younger ages and younger classrooms, if I can call it that. I think the fourth area would likely be around financing. We need to invest. I think it'll be wonderful to have the law, but as mentioned before, with a less than 1% of the education budget going into early childhood education, we would really need to ramp this up significantly. I think those are some of the issues that we would need to overcome. But it's not impossible. I think where there is a dream, everything is possible, and it can be done. It will not all be perfect at the beginning, but I think it will be a big start and definitely a big bonus for all the children who will have access. And as I'm thinking about all the children, every single child, I'm also thinking about the issue of finances, in the sense household finances, because currently, the majority of the ECD centers we have are privately run and owned. That has some access barriers, obviously, for certain socioeconomic groups, even though we do have a certain level of subsidy from the government for ECD centers. So one would really have to look at that, the affordability for all, for this kind of 1 year, additional year of schooling.
So Maniza, there's a very comprehensive issue that we all need to address. There's a say, it takes a village to raise a kid, right? The commitment from the government, as you said, the budget, we are really underspent 0.8 and aiming for 5. It's going to be a challenge, but as you said, it's possible. And I'm very fascinated with the return on investment. For every rupiah you invest, you get 4 rupiah in return. That's probably the best return on investment compared to any investment instruments, perhaps in the stock market, right? So not only the commitment from the government, but also the contributions from multiple sectors are essentials. I think that's the key from what you explained to us. And now let's go back to what you mentioned earlier, the important role of the parents to understand the value of early learning, but also to get an understanding, a uniform understanding, the importance of this early childhood. So the questions to you, how do you think that the parents can play an active role in supporting the development of their children?
I really love that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, because it does. And I think that the first encounters most children in the world have is definitely with their parents, their mother, the father, siblings if they have, and everything, caregivers, all around, right? And so just imagine that critical role of those people that are surrounding that child, parents and caregivers. So they are absolutely pivotal and fundamental to what we're discussing. Do all parents in every corner of Indonesia have the knowledge and the means to support the best development of their child, the best start to life? And I think the answer to that is varied. Does every parent, every caregiver have the will and the wish? Absolutely. I have no doubt about it, right? So then there is a gap between a wish and an aspiration and actually what the reality is. So parents and caregivers need to be supported. And they need to be supported in multiple ways, because frankly, they're the ones who take the decision in terms of early initiation of breastfeeding. They're the ones who take the decision in terms of immunization of the child, early stimulation and play. They make the decision about, does the child go to kindergarten or not? They make the decision about how do I discipline the child, positive disciplining, which is extremely important. So they really need to have the knowledge
and
first
the
and
support.
foremost. Yes, the knowledge and indeed the support. So on the knowledge side of things, I think we spoke about parenting programs. I do think that we need to be mindful also of some of the very diverse social and cultural makeup of this country and see what are universal parenting, let's say, messaging and practices that can be kind of fine-tuned so that they are really very well accepted and taken in by parents and caregivers all over this very diverse country. But then there's a whole support system that's needed. It's needed, let's say, from the community workers, from the health workers, from the early childhood development teachers that are really supporting the core nucleus, the parents, to do the best that they can for their child. But then you look at the whole workplace, right? There is such a role for employment or employers, let me put it this, employers, to also support their workers and the parents in their companies or government agencies or other institutions to be able to care for their children. And that means family-friendly policies that employers can embrace and put in place. And it's important for employers also to understand that this benefits not only the employee and their family, it actually is a very good return on investment. Happy employee, good business. Simple.
I cannot agree more.
So I think let's try to remember, let's ask ourselves that question in terms of, you know, what is available to that parent, what is the support that they have, and just help create those layers of support so that really that child gets the best start in life. Yeah.
So we've discussed a lot. I'm looking at my notes because we have covered a lot in the past few minutes. So the value of early learning, parents' knowledge, the supports they need, the policies in the corporations, for instance, the budget constraints from the government, low access to early childhood educations, and then the shortage of qualified early childhood education teachers, as you mentioned. But something we should never forget. Let's talk about technology right now. That has become a very essential part of our life. What do you think, or how do you think we can leverage the technology, again, to improve the access and the quality of early childhood educations in the country like Indonesia?
Absolutely. Again, you know, this is a country where tech is everywhere. I think internet penetration is almost 70%, if I'm not wrong, in Indonesia. And actually, I was quite astounded to see that the number of mobile phone users in Indonesia is higher than the population of Indonesia, which means that some have 2 or 3 or whatever it is.
Yes.
So absolutely a wonderful asset that we can leverage in perhaps in a few ways that I can think of, but I suspect if you ask that question to younger people who are very savvy, they would give you 100 responses.
Right.
So let me stick to just a few. So we just spoke about, you know, parenting programs, for example. And sometimes, you know, many years ago, it would have been the traditional mindset, oh, you need to get a group together and you need to sit down face to face with them and discuss this and that and everything else, which still would have value. But in a population like this, with so much time spent on mobile phones, frankly, we can use that platform really for good and have absolutely key parenting messages, support tools that can reach the homes through these platforms. So that's one way, which is really to support, let's say, massive scale parenting programs. I think the second, if we look at some of the service providers, for example, the early childhood education teachers as well, right? They too can use the connectivity and internet platforms and social media platforms, or even platforms that actually the Ministry of Education has put forward for teachers to learn about good practices, new pedagogy on early childhood education. I know as an organization, as UNICEF, we've also put on sort of, micro videos on tips and bits into that site so that a large number of teachers at different levels of the education system can access it. So it can be a real resource for service providers. I would say the same in terms of healthcare providers, particularly at the community level, who have the face-to-face interactions with families and their children as well. There's a lot of learning and educational materials that can be put through that. I also think in terms of early childhood education, when used appropriately, age appropriately, I think technology can spark curiosity as well. And particularly if we're looking at, supporting children to be ready for the world of the future. Again, it needs to be age appropriate at the right time, but as one tool in the learning process and the learning environment, I think that could be also another way that technology can help this movement, so to speak. So there are just a few examples, but as I said, I suspect there are many, many more out there.
Right. And that's exactly the essence of early childhood educations, to get all these children to be ready to the next level of educations. And of course, we can take the advantage of the existence of technology. So we've talked a lot about multiple elements in the whole ecosystem, multiple stakeholders in ECED. Now let's discuss another important element of the stakeholders. This is the government, private sectors, NGOs, or philanthropic organizations. This is the final questions to you, where we need your advice. Can you recommend what are the concrete steps to be taken by all these stakeholders to make sure that early childhood education and development to be put as priority by the government?
Given that early childhood development is such a critical piece in the development and prosperity of any country, but in particular Indonesia, given its population, I think this has to be a concern of all the stakeholders that you have mentioned. In terms of government, has been supporting and working on the holistic, integrative early childhood development model. And in certain provinces, we have also been supporting the, let's say, rollout of this and learning lessons from it. So I think the intent and the platform is there. The issue is, again, what we talked about, expansion and access, and perhaps having a stronger regulatory framework and standards in terms of how these are managed, but standards that are also monitored. And so I think there is a role for that enabling environment and monitoring and evaluating the impact of this. And government has a strong role to play there. When we look at business and the private sector, I think there may be several ways that the business and the private sector can support. One could make it simple and say simply by resources, because there's going to be a huge need to expand the number of centers that's going to be needed. Exactly. So one could just, put it as simple as that. But I think the second thing also could be through some of its assets and expertise. Assets, big tech firms can bring in the tech support at a discounted or pro bono rate. Yes. Why not?
I agree.
Yes, to actually support some of the things that we've been talking about. I think I also already mentioned it, but it's also looking at business and private sector's own practices. Start at home, really, in some ways. Look at what's happening in terms of your own employee base. And you can make a huge difference because some of the businesses really employ a large number of people. So you can have a multiplier effect in that way. Let me talk a little bit about media. Media is, we just spoke about it, social media, but media houses can make a big difference. They can also offer space in terms of parenting tips and really make exciting, interesting programs about parenting. Perhaps even some PR companies can work pro bono to create these kinds of programs, right? So there are so many ways that one can contribute. I'd like to talk about two other stakeholders because there's so many. We have, of course, the non-for-profit NGO world as well. And they too, they do have a lot of grassroots connections. They too can kind of support quality of the services that are available, bring in their expertise, etc., but also link it up to the bigger picture, so that things are not, stay in small projects, but they're also part and parcel of a big picture. They do have a very strong role as well, given their very grassroots connections. And finally, I would perhaps say about faith leaders and faith-based organizations, because in this country, as in many others, faith plays a huge role in the everyday lives of individuals and families. And they have a huge role in terms of also parenting and putting out those key messages and encouraging parents, once we have all the centers in the world, in Indonesia, ECED centers, so to speak, to take them to the centers, the value of early childhood education, the importance of the 1,000 days. If they hear it at their places of faith and worship, I think it kind of amplifies the messaging. Of course, this will depend in different parts of Indonesia. It will be different, but I just see that everybody actually has an important role to play. I mean, we have to.
Exactly. I like the word of amplification. So there's a new jargon in the social sector. The new jargon is co-leadership. You don't need to be alone. You just need to build this coalition. So coalition-based approach will actually amplify the impact, as you said, Maniza. So thank you so much, Maniza, for these insightful discussions. Let me just share with the viewers some of the takeaways from these very fruitful sessions. I took notes, perhaps 3 points that I would like to share with the viewers. I was captivated with what you said, that every child has a right to have a best possible start in life. And investing in early years means investing in the society as a whole, not only on a child. And it is indeed a crucial step for Indonesia's moving towards a brighter future for Indonesia Emas, a golden Indonesia in 2045. Concerted effort from all stakeholders is absolutely essential, from the government, private sectors, development agencies, NGOs, NPOs, and parents and educators as well. I think we all need to work together to make sure that every single child, they have the opportunity to thrive. So before I close, I would like to share an inspirational quote from an early childhood expert. And he said, when you pay the attention to the beginning of the story, you can change the whole story. If a child is neglected in early years, he or she will miss out on many opportunities in later years. So thank you so much again, Maniza. It has been an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. This has been another episode of Tanoto Foundation Unlocking Potential podcast series. Please subscribe for more inspiring conversations. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.